And I'll say this, and I'll say it here, and I've said it many times. In the history of the state of Texas, no Chiefs Association, Sheriff's Association, Constables Association has ever filed a bill to improve the police profession. Not to this day. Everything you see came from the unions, driven by officers in local associations.
Welcome back, Blue Grit family. I'm your host, Tyler Owen, and
Clint McNear.
Hey, we did it good this time.
We did.
Welcome back. You guys hit that subscribe button before we delve or dive. We're not really sure what we're going to do today. We've got some pretty good guests today. Our big boss is in. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, sir.
The man, the myth, the legend, TMPA Executive Director, and Ron DeLord. Welcome to the Blue Grit Podcast.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
This will be a cool episode. We were trying to figure out how to condense this down into about 50, 60, 70 minutes. And when you have two guys that have literally decades and decades and decades of labor history, understand prior labor history, and where it all is, that's going to be a short, compacted. We're going to do it like auctioneers. But everybody knows Kevin. He's been around. He's executive director of TMPA for a long time. Been involved with the labor movement for a long time. Ron DeLord, if folks don't know him, who's Ron? Where'd you grow up? I think you guys both grew up
Golden Triangle.
not far from each other.
He's from the rich side of the Neches River. I'm from the poor side.
And that's defined by our house was on a foundation, not up on piers.
Ours was beer and beam.
Y'all had siding, is what you're saying.
Yeah, he was from Orange. I was from upscale Groves. My dad was a union bricklayer.
Oh,
So,
My dad was
fired.
a union truck driver.
well, if you weren't union, you weren't working in the triangle.
That's right.
So we just had a great point that just dawned on me, because both of you guys have been involved in labor for a long time, and one of the first questions in the episode shot now, because that was going to be the biggest question I wanted to ask. Y'all just answered it. Both of y'all grew up in a labor home.
You'd be surprised how many of us in the law enforcement labor movement in Texas are from the Golden Triangle. It's because it is heavy petrochemical. It's the old lumber industry down there, meat packing plants. It's always been unionized down there.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a wrap. They both grew up in a labor home, and that's a wrap. We can end it here.
Yeah.
explanation given.
So grew up in Groves. Family in law enforcement. What got you into law enforcement?
Well, like a lot of people, my dad and my later father-in-law had mixed feelings about police because of the picket lines, because the big refineries mostly were on strike, every 3 or 4 years. So the local police, usually Port Arthur or Beaumont, would be out there on the picket lines. And so when I'd wanted to get on the Houston Police Department when I was 19, nobody in my family had ever been in policing, and my dad talked me out of it. Stay in college. I was a union bricklayer apprentice, but I really just worked part-time. And so you could get on Houston at 19, go on the street at 20, even though you couldn't buy your pistol legally.
Or bullets.
Or bullets.
Yeah, under federal law, somebody else had to, because I started at 19. My brother had to go buy my bullets for me.
That's correct. So Houston would take you, but my dad talked me out of it, and I was going to Lamar, and I don't know, working as scaffolding, just working part-time, going to school, and one of my guys in the fraternity came in a Beaumont police uniform, and I said, "Oh, I didn't know." He said, "Oh, yeah, you can work shift work and go to school in the day." So on my 21st birthday in 1969, January 21st, they had a civil service test. If it had failed the day before, who knows? But Port Arthur was paying $438 a month, and Beaumont had just had a pay raise to $550. Now, I don't know what you can do with $550. That's a lot of money. So I took the test. They hired me. Did a little polygraph. That was about it. Interview. And he said, at the old police station, but go upstairs. There's a pile of uniforms up there. Go through and get this many pants, shirts, and stuff. And go down and get yourself a pistol. I never fired a pistol, so I bought an old M&P 38, the old traditional police pistol. And I showed up at work. And I noticed all these people were laughing. Well, I didn't know you had to have keepers on there, And so I learned the first day I said, oh, Lord. And he put me with an old sergeant who...
Your gun belt was spinning around.
Yeah, falling down,
Flopping up
you
there.
know, and somebody says, you can get keepers on there. And I didn't know about handcuffs. I mean, they didn't give you anything. An old wood nightstick.
And Velcro hadn't been invented
There
yet.
was no Velcro. And so they rode with this old sergeant, Max Kadish, who at the time, God had probably been on since World War II. And
Y'all have cars, right? I mean,
2 cars, 2-man cars, no air conditioning, no good time radio.
And a fleet of ponies.
In a
No AC and probably 3 on the tree.
yeah. There was nothing in it. It's just an old beat up car. And he kept talking about this Miranda had ruined policing and he was going to retire. But I didn't know who Miranda was. So I didn't want to say
Does he
anything.
work here?
I don't know.
Is that
And
the
so
chief?
I didn't know, and I'm riding around. So I said, what is it? He said, oh, that's that new Miranda decision. Then he put me with a training officer, and I went to work. I had no training, never fired a pistol.
No academy.
No academy, nothing. The chief called me in and said, here's the new penal code. Had come out in 1969, I guess, and had some changes. He said, read this and then go out there. And about 18 months later, TCO was formed about 69, but it wasn't mandatory, and they were giving everybody a year or two. So finally they said, excuse me, you got to go to this 1-month school. The state requires it now. There were people in there have 35, 40 years of service.
You know they were griping.
Going to the academy?
Sit there, an old trooper was the instructor.
160-hour academy.
That's it.
160 hours.
That's it. It
was the first.
No gun shooting, no high-speed driving. An old trooper who had retired was teaching the course. And so when I finished, I was there. I had my license 18 months later working on the street. But it was a different world. And, I don't, I guess you grow up in the South and particularly Southeast Texas. I grew up in a segregated world. My high schools had African-American schools were separate, football teams, school districts, and the police department only had 2 black officers, 1 detective working murders in the black part of town, and 1 patrolman, both of whom later retired, who just served warrants for the court in the black part of town. We had no women and only 2 black officers, and that was 1969. So.
How quick after you started your police career did you know that police labor, police association business, how quick did you know that that was something that you wanted to be involved in?
Well, I guess, and I'd like to say it came from growing up. My grandfather was a union bricklayer. My dad was a bricklayer in the union. Everybody we knew was in the union. We know anyone unless you were in management. And when I got on the police department in 1970, I got on the board. It was the Beaumont Municipal Police Association, coming off the TMPA names.
Yeah.
All Beaumont, Baytown, they all had municipal in there. And I was on the board, and an officer got in trouble over arresting a drunk, and he pulled him over and laid him in the back seat of the car. Someone saw it and complained. And that back then, it didn't matter if you had civil service. Chief fired him. So I was complaining to some people about that, and they said, the chief wants to see you. It was old Willie Bauer. He had been there since 1938. So he calls me in, and the assistant chief, and he was eating sunflower seeds and spitting in his cup, and he goes, boy, look around this room. Do you see anybody in here but us? No, sir. If you say one more word, you're fired. I said, I understand. I left and started applying for jobs, and shortly after that, I went to Mesquite. I understood perfectly well. There wasn't going to be any union talking around the Beaumont Police Department.
My future is clear to me.
I understand, Chief.
Thank you. See you later.
Yeah.
So you grew up in a union house. Any family in law enforcement? What?
Oh, yeah. I had older brother, brother-in-law, cousin, all worked for the Orange County Sheriff's Department when I was in high school. And they all left about the same time and went to work for this place called Baytown that I had never heard of. And I graduated from high school, and I did a year at Lamar University while I was working at the Better Business Bureau. And about the time I was finishing that freshman year, my brother, who had moved to Baytown, called me. He was going through a divorce, and he was getting custody of his son. And he said, he called me and said, "Hey, how would you like to move in with me and help me out with my son?" And I say, "Well, I need a job, and I want to go to school." And at first, he hooked me up with a security company. It was owned by a former Baytown cop. And I went to work there, and within 6 months, I went down and took the test and got hired at the police department. And so I started about 10 years after Ron did, maybe 9 or 10 years. But my academy was only 240 hours, and they still had a year to send you to the academy. They could hire you, put you out on the streets with no training, no FTO, no nothing. And they had a year to put you through the academy.
And I can tell you when that changed. In the mid-'80s, I went to Dick Brown, who Kevin knows was at the time probably one of the most powerful. He was the head of the Texas Municipal League, their lobbyist. And I went to Dick and I said, "Dick, 50-something% of all the police in Texas were working for about 50,000 officers, were working for at least 12 months before they would send them to school. And they, of course, didn't like you. They didn't want to spend the money. They'd get rid of you." And Dick said, "Well, that's just not right." I said, "Well, I'm going to file a bill that'll make them do it." This was about 85 or so. And he said, "Well, I'm not going to get in your way." Well, of course, all the chiefs showed up, the sheriffs, the constables. "We can't do this. We can't be sending people to school." But got the bill passed, but I had to give them another year, almost 2 years, for it to take effect. Like it passed in 85, they had till 87. And from that point forward, nobody could go to work. And basically it was a simple deal. If somebody can walk off the street and take your job is worthless. And that's what was happening to nursing. It was happening to teachers. People could walk in, get a temporary license. It's what's happening in jails right now, in county jails. That shouldn't happen, but it is. So people come in, get a temporary license, and go to work, have no training. So I said, well, let's just be licensed. And I like the concept. We're one of the few states, one of the first states to require licensing, because the minute we turn that tap off and make it difficult to get in, the quality of people goes up, what people have to pay to get them. And you'll also notice when we started doing that, it started all of the rating of people saying, well, we're looking for licensed officers, and that's what we have today. So anyway, that's what happened, because if left to their own volition, we wouldn't have done any of that thing at the time. And I'll say this, and I'll say it here, and I've said it many times. In the history of the state of Texas, no Chiefs Association, Sheriff's Association, Constable Association has ever filed a bill to improve the police profession. Not to this day. Everything you see came from the unions, driven by officers in local associations who came to the Capitol and said, we got to have drug testing. We got to have psychological testing. I won't name the county, but you know.
Polygraphs.
Huh?
Polygraphs. Lie detectors.
Yes.
All the hiring standards, all the training standards, all the in-service stuff came from the unions, the associations,
right.
The lodges, whatever you want to call them in your part of the state.
That is a huge point that I hope our listeners.
It's still true to this day. Ron's exactly right. The Chiefs Association is beholding to TML. The Sheriff's Association is beholding to the Texas Association of Counties. They want to hold costs down. We still, to this day, and you've heard me testify to it several times, we still try to do law enforcement on the economy plan in the state, and it's time to stop.
It's time to double down. I just saw a city the other day. They were going to start removing, they call it lowering standard, but I'll just say they're taking out aptitude tests, taking out certain requirements. I would double down now. Now, at this moment, when we're in a crisis of who wants to be a policeman, double down, raise standards. It will drive the cost up, but the quality will be so much better. We can't fill the gap with lesser qualified people.
Yeah. I've told people a dozen times, if there's not a solution at some point, the person showing up to your house when you call 911, you might not want them coming in your house. But if you want to lower standards, that's something you can face down the road.
And it's absolutely, right now, we've got this recruiting / retention crisis that's been going on now for years, and that's what people need to understand. I saw a flyer this morning about a city that has eliminated the aptitude test as part of their hiring process altogether, and the union is screaming about it because they've already lowered their standards to the point that the people they've got applying to be cops are the exact people you don't want being cops.
Yeah.
If you have a poll, show up. We'll have a test on Saturday.
Well, that's what TDC does. Sad to them. I'll tell you just a quick story. Back when I was doing lobbying in the 80s, there was a gap where the original TCO commission only applied to officers that were in 2.12 the Code
It's
of
okay
Criminal
to still
Procedure.
call it T-close. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's TCO. I understand. Anyway, so the old commission, but Dallas had formed a security force that looked just like Dallas that had 400 officers. And I filed a complaint, and they said, well, they're not in 2.12. They were licensing them on the Board of Private Investigators with a 10-hour handgun class.
Strike force or something, wasn't it?
Dallas
It was
Security.
the city of Dallas. It was basically their city marshals.
Yes, yeah. So
But they were security guards and not peace
but they
officers.
looked the same, had the gun. And so I filed a complaint with the commission. They said, well, we can't do anything. So during the session, I slipped a bill in TCO. It just said 2.12 or any other law. Nobody saw it. There was 150 categories of police excluded from 2.12. Racing commission, cemeteries could have police departments, on and on. So they got caught. And so I actually had TDC in there too, because we picked up county jails. And the director of TDC at the time, it was one of those days where people could actually work on legislation by verbally. It wasn't all run on computers. You could go up the last minute. They were moving the clock back. And so he came, he said, I need to talk to you in the hallway. I said, okay. He said, I'm going to tell you something. I think we ought to be under the commission, all of the correction officers, the state correction officers. He said, but I can't do it. I can't fill what I got. And this is a story he told me. And he said, I'm just looking for a guy who has 12 marbles in his pocket. And as he walks along the bank, the jail deal, he takes a marble and puts it in the other pocket. When he gets to the end, he has a marble, somebody's missing. That's what he told me in private.
Golly.
And I said, okay, fine, take him out. And I regret that because today there's so much we could do to help the people who work in the prison system to get those type of standards and reduce this 30-some-odd% vacancies. But the state doesn't have the willpower to do it.
So that bill is how the Houston Park Rangers became the Houston Park Police Department.
Well,
At the time, not part of HPD, but
there were some separate things in 212 that said you could have park rangers and you have airport security officers. So the first deal when Bill Clemens
there were two of them for airports. There was one for airports, and municipality was more than so many people. And,
Well, the first time I amended the airport security officers to airport police, the city of Houston and San Antonio got the governor Clements to veto the bill. But later they went in and fixed it. But at the time, park rangers in San Antonio, in Austin, could not make an arrest above a Class C. And so over time I think we have too many. Decades ago, I wanted us to come in and get rid of all of what I call second, third, and fourth tier. I used to always try to kill any state agency trying to get a law enforcement department. That's absolutely ridiculous. We have a Department of Public Safety. If the water department for the state needs security, well, put in your budget and send a trooper over. Or if you need investigators, DPS has them. But we didn't, and I won't name the senator, but I knocked the bill off of the state health department several times. And finally, as you know, they'll call you in and say, you're messing with my bill. I said, I just don't think the State Department of Health needs a police department. We have state police. He says, well, I told him I'm going to pass that bill. I need you to leave it alone. And since he was not our enemy, I had to leave it alone. So those things, we have 2,700 police departments, absolutely ridiculous. We don't need. Canada has 200 for the whole country. Australia has 8.
Kevin and I were.
I'm sorry, I have to correct you. There's 2,900 agents. 2,900.
Okay, another 2,000 came
No,
on.
no, there's 200. There's 200 that don't have any officers. that have 0 commissioned officers.
Okay.
It's a technicality. I get it.
It's ridiculous.
Kevin and I were out of state somewhere recently. He was having a conversation with a bunch of out of state people, and he quoted the number of law enforcement agencies we have in Texas, and there was at least 1 or 2 or a handful of other states there, and the look on their face, because that's the only policing I know is Texas.
Yeah.
And when he spouted how many law enforcement agencies are in Texas, you could see everybody there. At first, I thought he was just bullshitting them, or
Yeah.
We are the second largest state in the union. We have more law enforcement agencies than number 1, 2, 3. Sorry, 1, 3, 4, and 5
That's correct.
combined.
That's correct.
It's crazy.
Combined. California, Florida, New York, and Illinois combined have fewer law enforcement agencies than Texas has alone.
that's shocking.
It's a control issue where every little place with a stop sign thinks they got to have a police force, and now all the school districts creating police forces.
The water control districts have their own police forces.
We'll just go down to cities like what's the one out in Marble Falls? What's that? It has a city, but the
Horseshoe Bay.
Horseshoe Bay, but the police has Horseshoe Bay, but down below it's Lower Colorado River Authority police. So we don't need it. To me, we can change that. In California, why they don't have so many is about 30% of all police departments are contracted out. That's because what they have to pay and get. So like LA County, Riverside, all those have many hundreds of agencies. We should have done that, but we never created the type of sheriff's departments, except in a few large counties that could do that. So in California, sheriff's deputies make pretty close to what the PD makes, and the quality appears to be pretty close. Well, here, we've got, 100 and something counties, hardly have an incorporated town, and sheriffs are making $25,000.
Yeah.
So we never set that up. So if you're, I'm not going to pick on Southside Place, but it's one block, okay? But we let them have a police force, not because they need a police force. All of your metropolitan areas could be done. In Canada, they just came in, and of course, and said, Montreal's got 34 police departments on here. We're going to have one police force. You can keep all your cities. All of those are going to Montreal. Same with Ontario.
What he didn't
regional.
mention is that Southside Place is one block, but it's a rich block.
Yeah. Well, I understand. We get it, but there's no reason except that a few rich people would do it. See, I came very close back many years ago. A very wealthy man. He was an old banker. Wanted to create a Metro Police Force in Bexar County with San Antonio. He got the stuff, met with me. We talked about it. At the time, the deputies didn't bargain. They'd create a bargaining forum. It would later merge in, and slowly the sheriff would take care of the courts, processing, the jail, and all the outside policing would be done, just like it is in Las Vegas or Dade or Louisville, Charlotte. Well, we get the legislature. Guess who killed it? Well, I'll tell you.
TML.
No. Every constable, every elected district clerk, elected tax assessor, all these little nickel-dime positions that in any government would not be elected. You'd have, the city doesn't have each of its department heads elected. The county doesn't need that either. That's to keep alive a political machine and have people in parties.
The elected county auditor.
That's right.
Yeah.
What's the point? So it would have had a metro government.
It's a constitutional thing in Texas. I mean, our Constitution is, when it comes to county government, extremely archaic.
Well, yes, they have no power whatsoever.
It would requure some constitutional amendments to do
Yes.
that kind of consolidation that you're talking
But
about.
at that time, it would have had to have a corresponding constitutional amendment, but it would have had very similar. It's not like we don't have a model, and while they're not perfect, you don't need to have these vast unincorporated areas in Bexar County. God knows there's probably a million people. Harris could be 2 million people live in unincorporated areas. That should all be done by one police force. We don't need, well, in Dallas County, here in Tarrant, 300, 400 separate police departments. You don't need that. There's no unincorporated land left in either one. Why not have a metro police
Yeah.
and not have 300 chiefs, 300 SWAT teams, 300? I'm just saying, it's not going to happen.
I just recently found out that Precinct 5 down in Harris County, Precinct 5 Constable's Office, the largest constables department in the country.
That's correct.
Wow.
Man.
That came about in a fight with Jack Hurd. Jack Hurd had been the chief, became the sheriff. He got in an argument with county commissioners, and they started saying, well, fine, we'll just give all your work to those 8 constables. And so it all started just bleeding them off, because the constable's office's primary duties was process serving, working for the courts. They have a set of duties. And so, but they had all these large unincorporated gated subdivisions and stuff, and started just saying, well, here's 500 for you.
And Hurd's successor down in Harris County was okay with the sheriff doing nothing but correction.
That's correct.
And turning all enforcement over to the constable.
So they end up with 1,000-member constable officers, motorcycles, SWAT teams, and started doing all this work and contract work. Well, it is what it is. We're not going to fix it, so let's focus on not making it worse by lowering the standards. Anyway.
So we're talking about standards in union and association business. For our listeners, what everybody thinks of unions back, and you guys grew up with it in the southern part of the state. In North Texas, I was not around unions in any form or fashion.
In North Texas, union is a 4-letter word.
Yeah, seriously. But for our listeners and younger listeners, they think of unions, they think of like, in New York or California.
AFL-CIO, the Teamsters.
Yes, yeah.
Jimmy Hoffa.
And at a time,
Concrete Boots.
Unions were extremely, entirely, incredibly strong. Texas is really new to the labor movement, and you guys have a ton of experience. But in the grand scheme of American labor, Texas is really, really new to that. Because we're new, and along the border, for our listeners, along the border, there's a lot of meet and confer and collective bargaining, and it's moved north, and even in North Texas, there's some contracts now. But you guys have been around a long time, specifically in the labor movement. Whoever wants to go first, where do you think it looks like right now of where we are against some of the other movements in this country? And what do you think it looks like moving forward? Are unions struggling, or are we getting stronger?
I'm going to let Ron comment on that mostly. I'm going to make this comment, though. Just in the last few years, Massachusetts started licensing their peace officers for the first time in their history. That amazed me. Massachusetts being a labor state, they've had police unions back to the 1910s.
Probably one of the oldest police departments, I guess,
Boston,
in the country.
I think Boston was the first place where you actually got law enforcement getting organized as labor because of the working conditions they were under. But the fact that Massachusetts took another 100 years to start licensing and commissioning their peace officers rather than letting every little jurisdiction make those decisions tells you that we're not as far behind the curve as you might think. As a matter of fact, we're ahead of a lot of other states when it comes to where we sit. About half of all the peace officers who are employed in Texas are covered by some sort of a bargaining agreement right now. It's only about 100 agencies, but it's the 100 biggest agencies, except for Falfurrious and Pinehurst.
Yeah.
But, there are all those outliers. But, Houston, and Dallas is a type of meet and confer, but it is bargaining. Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Austin, El Paso, all the way down
Arlington.
Well, Arlington, they've never
have
actually done a
confer.
contract. They've got an agreement that's not in writing.
Yes.
But
Meet and confer-ish.
Brownsville, Beaumont, Corpus Christi, they've all got some type of bargaining, So people don't understand about half of the cops in Texas do have bargaining. The other half of the cops in this state are pretty much just at-will employees. So we've got it's all or nothing in Texas. But that's still light years ahead of Arkansas and Oklahoma and all the states that abut Texas. But compared to the Northeast, we're still far behind. Or compared to California.
And civil service protection has been helpful for those that don't have bargaining. It's the outliers, too, that really, really struggle because
Civil service, and you have to remember, about 5 different types of civil service for Texas law enforcement. Yes, it has been helpful for some of those that don't, but there's still only about 70 of those that have civil service that don't have bargaining of some kind. And it's probably fewer than that now. There's probably more and more that have adopted meet and confer contracts of some kind. But still, we're talking about 200, 250 agencies out of 2,700 that have any kind of due process or job protections at all.
And for the listener or watcher, viewer, briefly talk or touch on it, because some people may not even know what meet and confer even means. In East Texas, meet and confer really doesn't even exist out there.
Well, I think Lufkin might have an MOU.
Maybe, but
That's
I mean,
it. But the rest do not.
yeah, just
You can't say MOU. It's a memorandum of
Understanding.
understanding. It's a type of meet and confer
Yeah.
that may or may not fall under the statutes that permit meet and confer
Yeah.
within the state of Texas.
yeah. So if you guys want to briefly talk on just what a meet confer, very briefly, what does meet confer mean?
Meet and confer is bargaining, but it's completely voluntary. It's
Yeah.
completely, the city and the officers' representative union, whatever, they can sit down and bargain a contract, but they're not compelled to.
Permissive.
Collective bargaining requires the two sides to bargain in good faith. So
I can tell you, since I'm the oldest person here, basically, Texas in the 1940s, right after World War II, the AFL and the CIO were separate. AFL were craftsmen. The CIO was industrial, the big old industrial plants. And they were, if not communists, they were leaning that way and driven by socialist wobblies, international stuff. And so that clash came in the 40s, and they were started organizing in Texas. Time we had electric streetcars in most major cities, so organized streetcar workers. So the state legislature in 1947 said they put all these anti-union deals, right to work, no picketing, banning public workers from collective bargaining in the statute. But thankfully, probably Houston's, a couple of big locals, and the firefighters primarily, got the state to adopt, at the time was called 1269M. Today, Chapter 143. So that came about. Lots of cities got civil service in that period. I went and got the original. It's like 5 pages long, and today it's like 200 pages long. But at the time, it gave you some fundamental. The base mission says to protect the police from political interference. That's basically what 143 is. So all of that came about in 1971, the firefighters pushed a collective bargaining bill. There was lots of militancy going on during the Vietnam War. A lot of states were enacting bargaining laws, and it was turbulent times, but they couldn't get it passed. The next session in 73, TMPA with the firefighters, the police were less interested in it, but there were elements of the state that wanted it. And they cut a deal, but the governor, Briscoe, would not sign it unless it had a local option requirement, same as 143. Otherwise, we'd have got it straight up. It'd be a different state today. So that didn't happen, so we had a big rush of elections. Beaumont, Port Arthur, Houston, the Rio Grande.
all the way up to Sweetwater.
Oh, yeah. There were hundreds and hundreds of elections in the 70s. I was involved in at least 2 in Mesquite. So everybody pretty much had won by about 75. There was just a one winning here. Dallas had 2 different. They weren't winning outside of areas. So it had kind of run its course, but everybody was afraid to mend the bargaining law because they were afraid the cities would get in there and gut it. So it really started with Houston and a few other locals wanting to get something but didn't want to have an election. So in a series of deals, we got meet and confer passed to the legislature, cut a deal with Rick Perry, and got like Buster Brown, we got a Republican, and said, look, it's not bargaining, it's meet and confer.
He's kind of condensing that a little bit.
Yes.
The first meet and confer bill applied, and it's in Chapter 143.
Yes.
Right behind the civil service stuff. It applies only to Houston, Austin, and Fort Worth. Period.
Yes.
Nobody else. And Houston was able to do it without the referendum. Austin was able to do it without the referendum because there's a provision in there that said you could do it a certain way.
If the city recognized
And if you did it fast enough.
Yeah.
But then Fort Worth waited too long, and then Fort Worth eventually did it via the referendum process. But
there was a little backstory to that.
There's no doubt. There's always a backstory.
Fort Worth would have come under it on a census rollover, and at the time the city opposed it and demanded they have a referendum, and Mike Moncrief wouldn't move the population bracket up so I could get ahead of it. So Fort Worth had to have a referendum, and they won.
They did.
And that's correct. But in Houston, Austin, and Fort Worth, the firefighters, and it'll take too long to explain why, they all went for collective bargaining, even though they had meet and confer. So those cities, the police have meet and confer, the fire have 174 collective bargaining.
Yeah.
I will tell you, there is no substantive difference between any of them. They're all meet and confer, because in true collective bargaining, there would be an impasse procedure. And so in 174, it's voluntary arbitration, which cities have never agreed to go to, or district court. And that was held unconstitutional, recently been ruled to be constitutional. But the reason no one will do that is that language was written by Dr. Morris at SMU, who used the NLRB, National Labor Relations Act. It says you have to have a trial based on private comparables, not public. And that's why no one's ever gone. So, in essence, you can have
also the impasse provision in 174 was declared unconstitutional back in 93.
Well, the judicial part was held unconstitutional because arbitration is voluntary.
Right, the judicial review, yeah.
Yeah, but that's been overturned now. It was overturned in a Port Arthur case, but in one court. But the recent firefighters in Houston won that was now constitutional. Firemen can probably go.
That's the case where both the firefighters and the city claimed victory when that decision came out.
Yeah.
They both said we won.
Well, now they've got arbitration
That's a good
bill.
fight.
There's a bill passed just for them. But the reason is the fire could use 174 judicial review because their job can be broken into private comparables. You know, pipe fitters, industrial firefighters, federal. So
right, especially in Southeast Texas,
That's
where you
right.
have all the chemical plants,
That's
all those
right.
private fire departments. It's easy to get private sector comps. There are
None in the police.
except that we do have some private police departments in Texas, like Rice University and SMU, and
that's another
Baylor.
tangent I'm against. I'm totally opposed to any university private having a police force. I believe it's unconstitutional because nobody should be a police officer, a public officer in this state that does not answer to an appointed or elected official.
to the voters somehow.
To the
Somehow,
voters.
so ultimately
Because you're
yeah.
enforcing the Constitution. In these private universities or private hospitals, they can contract that work with if they want public officers, or they can have private security. I'm not against the security.
That horse is out of the barn, though, Ross.
Oh, no, I can't stop it. I can't stop it. But you can see now this problem of when you work for a private university, I won't name the university, but an officer who had been in a city police took on a university job because your kids can go to school for free. You work for the university. He criticized the university. It was very mild in a publication, just said, it's really not policing here. You basically call the dean or call their parents. It's not like they fired him. Ended up getting a private sector labor lawyer, went to court, and the court said they fall in between. They don't have the constitutional, you don't have First Amendment free speech unless you're a public worker over matters of mutual concern. He got fired. He would have clearly been illegal in any public law enforcement agency, and he lost his job, and they're in that space, and I think that's wrong.
Well, I'll give you one, I'll name names.
Yeah.
Rice University had an officer named David Sedmak on a weekend, left the campus to back up some Houston officers involved in a firefight.
Yeah.
And he was fired for leaving the campus to go help his brother officers
That's right.
who were being fired upon. We did a press conference on it. We screamed bloody murder. Senator John Whitmire then demanded copies of the reports and everything, and Rice University told him, we're not subject to open records or open meetings. You can go pound sand.
That's correct.
Now, Senator Whitmire passed some legislation that changed that.
I was going to say I wouldn't recommend saying that to Senator Whitmire.
It's been changed a little bit, but still the whole concept of private entities having police powers with no voter oversight
is wrong. And it should be
it's
unconstitutional.
questionable at least.
Well, and it's a
It should
delicate,
be in the courthouse by a real lawyer.
it's a delicate situation
Yeah.
for our members. I went to visit a large university. In the parking lot, a bunch of them are getting on duty. There's police cars. They're in police uniform. I go inside, ask to meet with the chief, just to say hello and introduce myself. He comes out, and as we're walking down the hall, he stops and he turns around. He goes, just to let you know, we're not really a police department. And I said, well, that's weird, sir. I said, I was in the parking lot a while ago, and there's these cars with these things on top.
Say police on them.
And they have cages, and I saw a bunch of guys that dressed like you that it looked like they had guns and badges. They look like police in the parking lot. Well, we are police, but we're not. And I said, we have a presidential library here. You have a lot of occasions for a bunch of things to occur here. Probably some nuts would love to come bomb some of these places that you have here. So you don't want to be the police? Because he said, we don't want to do anything. We don't want to have rifles. We don't want to do anything. And I thought, man, it's shocking for a guy who has a ton of guys and gals under his command that his mindset he made clearly to me is we're not the police.
He also had a line of duty death not too long ago that was not eligible for inclusion on either one of the walls or for the public safety officer benefits because they are not public officers.
That's right.
What an amazing segue by our executive director. Line of duty deaths. Y'all have a
Ain't
ton
nothing but a thing.
of union and labor experience. The second thing you both have a ton of experience and knowledge on that I want listeners to hear about is our memorial. And you both have a ton of history kind of in different ways, but I know Kevin can spew dates and history and the genesis of our memorial. And Ron, for you guys that don't know, when you see a Texas Ranger from 1883 gets put on the wall this year, I've heard people say, well, how did that happen? Or what's going on with that? Or what's this line of duty from 1902? Ron either discovered or was provided a lead, and I guess for a while, or now singularly, do the background on that. But I'd like to kick off because I think it's important, especially with us right now having to figure out what to do and raise funds to expand our wall, and I hate that we're having to expand it, but I'd like to do maybe two quick segments. Kevin, about where the memorial started and the genesis of how kind of what kicked that off. And I love that ours is at the Capitol. I'm super proud ours isn't stuck somewhere in a city or somewhere. I'm proud that it's on our state capitol.
And Ron doesn't like to brag on himself, so I will. Ron's the godfather of the Texas Peace Officers Memorial. It was his vision. He was the one that got the whole thing started. He was the one that got Buster Brown to introduce the legislation to create the
When was that?
89.
About 89. No, it wasn't
When
that.
it ultimately passed, it was, I think, 89. 85 is kind of when it all got started.
Yeah, they dedicated it, in 96?
99?
99. So it was about 10 years
It took
earlier.
10 years to get it completely done from the time it was finally approved until it was completed and dedicated.
87 session introduced a study, 89 put it into motion, and there's a long story, but it took 10 years in how it
There
got.
was a prohibition against any public funds being used, and then a few years later, Ron went back to the legislature and got them to at least do matching funds on what we had all raised. And there was a lot of different entities that helped out in that process. I was on that committee. I played a very minor role at the time, but I was, there representing TMPA, but there were a lot of groups that helped out, a lot of work that went into that. It was almost identical to the timeline for the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. It was going on during the same process.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
I think it was actually dedicated a couple of years earlier than the state memorial, but they were right there neck and neck going on. So so we give Ron credit as being the godfather for that.
Well, just being a history buff and realizing that nobody really knew how many officers had been killed. We actually still don't know the number. We're one of the few states They're constantly finding cases. Our history is pretty rough and violent, and so.
And we always lead the nation in the number of officers. I mean, almost
from the beginning.
95% of the time, Texas has more officers killed than I do than
any other state, and always has, regardless of New York or California having at one time double the number of officers, but we have more deaths. But actually, California was starting the Peace Officers Memorial, and I was there on some function and went over to the Capitol, and they had like the old bookend books, those large books, and they would write the name in, and some calligrapher would write the name of an officer killed. And at the end of the year, they would roll the page over, and they were trying to build a memorial. I said, well, that's what we need. And we got the bill, got some senators to file it, and House Member Bill Blackwood was a big help in all that. And so the problem lies, we got it passed but I was insistent that it be on the Capitol grounds. But there's a state preservation board run by the speaker, the governor, and lieutenant governor that controls. That's like sacred ground. And hundreds of groups are always wanting something on there, and they're resistant to it. So at the time, and Ken was on the committee, or groups on the committee, and survivors. They had this memorial committee. They said, well, we can put it over here by the insurance building. I hated it at the moment. I thought, well, it would be right up front. What a blessing. What a blessing. It turned out to be the most peaceful, perfect spot. At the time, of course, the state architect, Tico, had a lady that designed it. So then became the problem. Originally, that obelisk had a blue light shooting into the sky.
It was a laser show.
That's right.
With it, yeah.
And the bottom was all water. And then
a little stream was supposed to
come out from that little spot. Yeah. And so because the money at the time was like $1.6 million. It doesn't sound like a lot today. At the time in 1980, it was a lot of more money than anybody else had to give to it. And so kind of went to the architect, the committee did, and said, what are our options? Well, take out the light because the airport's going to stop that. In the State Preservation Board.
Well, don't just bypass that though. The laser show was going to be so cool because it was going to be a blue light that came down the stream.
Yes.
During normal times.
Yeah. And
then when we had a line of duty death, it was going to change to a red laser coming up between the obelisks, going into the sky.
You could see it from anywhere.
To commemorate the officer's death.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
that got cut out. There was also Preservation Board also had a concern about the water leaking into the garage beneath it.
And they said in the past they had water things, but 50 years later the mechanics doesn't work, it leaks, it becomes polluted. I said, okay, how about take out the light?
Thank God we didn't do that, especially with Austin going on. With
we'd have been.
Can you imagine a bum taking a bath down there right now?
Oh no, it'd be horrible.
Hell no.
And a snail darter would shut it down. So anyway. And
by the way, I also want to say this: by far, hands down, the most impressive monument on Capitol grounds. And having it at the Capitol is the right thing to do. I have visited other states. Yeah. The New York City Police Memorial, by the way, is just, to me, it's depressing to look at it. It's not well maintained, and it's in the ingress and egress is horrible. The Louisiana has a very nice memorial, but it's in a private cemetery.
Yes.
Georgia has it at their state law enforcement, fire, and EMS training facility that the vast majority of the public can't
get in the grounds.
Ours, I agree with 1,000%. There was a day I was down here doing something several years ago, and it was a long day, bad day, stressful day. And I don't know why I drove down to the Capitol. Mm-hmm. I was just going to, I guess, walk around. I walked down and sat down there. Most peaceful, perfect setting, shaded, birds chirping. I ended up sitting there a couple of hours, and everything was good after.
If we could just paint that wall of the Sam Houston building, it would help. That wall is just kind of...
We can do it tonight. What you got?
We can do a mural up there or something.
Well, the Austin police won't catch you because there's not enough of them. But DPS would. They're paying attention.
No, they're all down at the border.
Yeah. So anyway, it all got trimmed down. The committee cut everything, and then it got down to, they gave us basically, you have a timeline when you start a project of about a decade. And if you don't fund it, it's gone. Because there's probably 10 other Vietnam, various war memorials, and just anything. And the state said, we're not putting any tax money in it, because the minute I put tax money in it, everybody's going us to fund their memorial. So eventually, the commission was churning. I had a couple of disagreements. They were churning money, trying to get fundraising, and we only had about $500,000 in the bank. But they needed to cut it all the way down to $1 million. And I went over there, and Bill Ratliff might have been the House over finance, and the guy from San Angelo, Robert, I can't think of his last name with a J. He was a Senator Ratliff, and him ran the.
I'll think of it.
Yeah,
Janus, Bob Janus.
Yes,
yep.
They were the two powerhouses. So I don't think it was. It may have been Toller. Fred Toller was the director. Whoever was the director time. Of course, they're there because of budget. So I came and I sat, and we sat, and we sat every day in finance, and finally, just had a conversation. Look, this memorial's going away. I mean, we're down to the end. I need the funding. And they came up with a deal that, I don't remember if it's just DPS, motor vehicle inspection stickers. John Sharp was a controller of the state, and so he was a good friend of mine. He went to him, he said, all right, just do this. So they passed it, and it said, if what's budgeted for DPS tickets exceeds, they can match dollar for dollar up to $500,000, something roughly like that. So I get a call one day in from Fred, says, I think he's watching. He said, I think the DPS has written enough tickets that we can get the money. I called John Sharp. He certified it. And we said, let's do it. And that's how it got dedicated by Tico in 1999. Rained all day. I mean, it was a mess.
It was a terrible day.
But there was only 586 names that had been identified.
Wow.
586 at the time that agencies brought forward. And I said,
now, that was 24 years ago.
Yes.
We typically average 12 to 15 line of duty deaths a year,
Yeah.
not counting COVID.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, if you extrapolate that out, we shouldn't be anywhere near the 2,200 names or 2,300 names that are on there now. That's because we've identified all of these other cases that you're talking
That's correct.
about, and we keep finding more and more.
And we also added TDC. It wasn't in the original bill. We added correction officers for counties. It just because the state, that's another story. When the state had to train all the sheriff's department, used to everybody was a deputy in the sheriff's department. As soon as they had to provide the training, they got a separate category for jailers, dropped the hours down to almost nothing. At the time, they aren't peace officers, so we had to add them. And you might remember
Added federal officers that were killed
you remember
inside the
the
state.
female Border Patrol officer and another officer in, I think, McAllen answered the call of a kid who was a son of a police officer who was shooting out. He ended up killing this Border Patrol officer and her partner.
It was Harlingen.
Harlingen.
It was his daddy's duty weapon.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the father came to the legislature and testified he wanted his daughter's name on the state memorial, but we didn't have any category. So all the groups said, sure, why not? So we did. So that's how we added the feds. So actually, I brought all the feds up to snuff. I got with the National Memorial, Officer Down, some of the Border Patrol unions, they gave me stuff. So I was able to we caught up on the federal historic. We just this last year added another one that died back 30 years ago. And then I got TDC, which is really, I mean, anyway, they're a strange organizationally, but I got the Prison Museum to help me. Jim Willett, who was a director, used to be a warden, he helped us. And we got everybody caught up, and that added like 800 or 900 names. So we never thought we'd have to go to the back. Who'd have thought it? It just, at the time, you had 500 names with 2,000 spaces on the front. And we're already moved to the back.
Right. The thinking was we've already got
We got them.
almost 200 years of history. We're going
Yes.
all the way back to the
Sure.
original Texas Rangers commissioned
Yeah.
by President Sam Houston.
Yeah.
We're thinking almost 200 years. We've only got less than 600 names.
Yeah.
This will last forever.
Wow.
And it's lasted us less than a quarter of a century.
That's correct.
And we've already been moving to the back of the wall now for the last 4 years maybe. And we're having to move a bunch of names to the back of that wall.
And we're currently in works collaboration with all the vested parties to fundraise, because just moving to the back is not going to be sufficient.
No.
Is that right?
Well, not forever.
Yeah.
We bought us some time by moving some of the older names, but eventually we will fill up the back of that wall, and then we'll have to come up with another plan. We'll have to extend the walls further down those sidewalks. Yeah. We're also adding a canine memorial.
Yeah.
That legislation was passed in 21. We now have a private donor who's contributed the funds to complete that process.
We can identify him though, right?
Lon Craft, past president.
Yeah,
Shout out to Lon Craft.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's donated $25,000. I don't think the project will take that much money. So he has agreed that whatever money we have left over, we can put toward the wall and the moving of the names. We also need to do some upgrades to the landscaping and the lighting around the back of the wall, so people that want to go see those names can walk back there.
Thank you, Uncle Lon. My favorite. You were always my favorite uncle, Uncle Lon.
We just have to get with the preservation board and finalize, what that is going to look like, and start getting the architecture done on that as well. So, but yeah, eventually we're going to have to expand the wall.
And that's expensive, because if it was $1 million to build at the beginning, it's 3, 4, 5 million.
I've always wondered this. Why is that thing is built out of granite, is it not, or marble? Is it marble?
Most of it.
I think the walls, they're slabs.
Okay.
It's not a solid block. There's slabs there, and they take the
fascia.
The fascias, and they take it off and then put a new one on or move it.
Right.
But the base around it is leaking from just erosion and water and.
We don't know where they were built from or what.
We corrected that.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
About 10 years ago now. We had to spend a ton of money, like $350,000, to correct that. They call it leaching.
Yeah.
Got that done, but that's going to need to get redone yet again. I mean, there's constantly maintenance and upkeep, repairs that have to be done to any structure.
I don't know where they're going to put more walls. Unless you went to the front and did it like it's a circle, then you would almost not be able to have a service there.
I think you might be able to put some around the base of the
like the National, but that's only going to hold so many. And then my concern is people having to. I know they do it. They have to get down on their knees.
No, I think we do like the Vietnam Memorial and just go down the sidewalk. Just go due east. Sorry.
You could do it in slats,
Yeah.
Down, but that's going to cost millions and millions of dollars. You're probably a decade or more away. COVID added, and there's probably another. I want to guess it. Looking at my Excel, about at least 300 people waiting because you're required to get ERS approval now. I know.
A lot of those are not going to be approved.
No, they're not.
In my opinion, a lot of them are not going to be considered line of duty deaths. But yes, we're still going to have a significant number of names already that need.
There's probably at least 100 that were approved, just didn't get on this run.
Yes,
and so that'll slow out. That'll filter out. There's nobody doing a lot of historical research, but there'll always be a few, but not in big blocks of 100 or so.
Yeah.
So now. I don't even know if you want to talk about this question of suicides.
Maybe we save that for another one.
All right, because that decision is coming, and I'll just say this, the federal government, because of the January 6th deaths, has ruled that suicide on the federal level meets the Federal Death Benefits Act. There's 4 or 5 states and in Canada where they have now ruled on selected cases that those were post-traumatic death.
Yep.
That's been coming for several years. There's movement in Australia and I get it. It's emotionally driven. There's lots of factors. But let's just assume that they come up with a criteria. I know 50 people who committed suicide were police. This maybe. We wouldn't have enough wall, and how far back is that? I'm just saying that's the next biggest challenge to the memorial community,
right?
Is how we deal with that. The federal government kind of opened the door, I know California has it. Right now, they're not doing it, but 4 or 5 states are getting ready to approve.
Am I correct, though, that even though the feds did, in fact, approve a standard and include blue suicide, only one was added this year, and that was the
first one there at January.
Washington Metro officer committed suicide about 9 days after that incident. But that's the only one that's been added so far. I'll say this. I don't agree with the federal standard. I think there needs to be more added to it. But I will also say, after Uvalde, I've rethought my position on this, because I certainly can see where an officer could be so traumatized by having to witness that kind of carnage that his sacrifice should go on the wall and his family should receive those benefits and those honors.
Well, National FOP now has come out in favor of suicides being added to the moral. And I agree with you. In principle, I don't think we ought to go down that road, but I can't see how we're not.
Yeah.
Because the question's always going to be, somebody is going to fit a pattern of which reasonable minds would say there is no question that officer. And we know it's real. How many soldiers kill themselves every day, and when police officers kill, there's
right. But how do you do it without creating an incentive, a financial incentive for an officer to take his own life? And that's what concerns me most about it. And I also worry about the families of officers who were killed, trying to take down an armed suspect or whatever, seeing their hero's name surrounded by names of officers who chose to take their own lives, and it just seems to diminish that honor.
Well, you'll be involved. I won't be involved, because I'm just saying, and I sent a note over to the Memorial Committee several times, just giving them articles saying this is coming. I believe there's at least 2 departments have submitted recent suicides to the memorial as line of duty deaths. I won't name the agency, but so they've been sent. Now, they can reject them or not reject them. Just remember, it is a statute. Family could sue, and they might win the fact that it be considered. We probably ought to get ahead of it, at least legislatively, and move it into a category where there be some study or time to vet it, because just remember, if A gets on and B says, well, mine's similar to A, then B's going to want on. I don't know how to deal with it.
You bring that up, because TMPA is currently, we actually partnered up with PORAC and Copline, and we are helping sponsor some research into blue suicide and how, what leads to blue suicide, but also whether or not prior traumatic brain injuries contribute to
CTE,
much like
repeated concussions.
Much like the research the NFL did for their players. There's a push, there's an effort going on right now to do some research into that for law enforcement officers. But maybe, Ron, at some point we look at they qualify for the benefits but not the walls.
And I agree. I'm glad I don't have to decide, because strangely, as hard as my outside is, I'm soft inside about this, like all of us are, because we know the people involved and we know the trauma.
Only because of his age, by the way.
You get more emotional when you get to 75. But I see it from all the sides, but I do think it's something we ought to start talking about in the memorial process and getting people involved, because it will be here. I just don't want it to come emotionally driven by some state legislator, and next thing you know, we have a bill and
shoved down our throat, not well thought out.
50,000 people are now eligible to submit their names going back 100 years.
Or for the sole motivation behind it to be whatever your perception is of the January 6th event.
That's correct.
That should not have anything to do with it.
Anyway, enough. We'll save it for another day, but it is coming.
I would love to put a placeholder in it and have a part 2 of this. Both of you are a treasure for the Texas labor movement, y'all's history and knowledge of the history, your involvement in it. I think this is super important. And I'm not comparing y'all to my grandfather, I promise, but my grandfather my whole life told stories, and nobody ever memorialized them, and he's passed away. And now everybody can't really remember exactly what they are. And I think this is important. In 60 minutes, the amount of history you guys shared, I thought I knew a lot of it from hanging out with you that I've learned. And I think it's super important. I would love if you guys to do a part 2.
We haven't even started talking about all the fighting we've done with each other along the way.
No, but that's the cool part about it too, though.
He won't tell you I represented him when he was in Georgetown Police Department.
But no, that is the cool part about it, because you guys,
Passing through.
Yeah.
you guys have been around the block, good side, bad side, and sitting here today, both collectively sharing the what y'all have contributed to the history of labor movement and law enforcement in Texas. I would love to do a part 2 or a part 2 and a part 3 and get some of this memorialized, or if people want to watch it, they can sit down and hear some of this.
Well, let's get it on the books, because the guy ain't getting no younger.
As my son said, I'm going to start visiting y'all every month because you're not getting any younger. But I do think we didn't even get to what's going on labor-wise nationally, police reform, how it impacts the nation, how it impacts Texas, and it does impact Texas.
The rogue DAs, the prosecution of police, the weaponization of the district attorney's offices.
Yes.
Well,
by God, let's just do part 2.
Sounds like part 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, no shit.
We got several more episodes.
I freaking love it. We normally do a rapid fire, but that's only when we end an episode. I know this is not goodbye. It's we'll see you soon.
Yeah.
And we're trying to keep these brief so people will watch for an hour and not zone out and turn us off and go somewhere else after 2 hours. Absolute freaking enjoyed getting to listen to you guys go back and forth and share the history of labor, of law enforcement. I hope everybody stays tuned for 2, 3, 4, 5, and part 6.
Yep. Ron, it's good meeting you, man. I've heard a lot about you. It's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good.
It's okay.
It's all good.
I'm an acquired taste.
You're like fine wine.
That's it.
You're like
not
fine
everybody
wine.
likes it.
Boss, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy ass schedule to come in and hang out with us.
You bet. Let's go take care of some work.
Yeah, that's right.
Ron, I'll see you soon.
All right.
You guys stay safe out there. Hit that subscribe button. We greatly appreciate you guys tuning in, and you viewers, watchers. Again, you guys stay safe. God bless you, all of you. And as always, may God bless Texas. We're out.